What if I told you that the shiny bottles of shampoo lining our modern shelves have almost nothing in common with how people in the Middle Ages washed their hair? In fact, what they used would disgust you. Before we begin, hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear is the kind of history they buried in forgotten manuscripts and secret archives. Okay? And drop a comment with what you think they used, because the truth will surprise you. Picture this. The year is 1347. You're standing in a narrow medieval street. The stench of smoke, mud, and sweat pressing against you like a suffocating fog. A woman emerges from a cottage, her hair stringy and tangled. In her hands is not a bottle of shampoo, but a clay jug filled with stale ale mixed with crushed herbs. She tips it over her head, the sour smell filling the air, while her children laugh at the absurdity of it. This was hair care in the Middle Ages, and as strange as it sounds, beer was only the beginning. The first clue comes from a forgotten 14th century household manuscript, once stored in the private collection of a monastery and only rediscovered in the early 20th century. In its margins, a monk had scribbled a peculiar recipe. Take ashes of birch, mix with water and herbs of sage, apply to the head for luster. Imagine that, ashes soot, burned wood dropped directly into hair. To medieval people, this wasn't dirt, it was medicine. I believed ashes cleansed the scalp of evil humors and absorbed oils, but in reality, it left hair gritty, foul-smelling, and dry. Okay? Other recipes are worse. Archaeologists, analyzing residue in old wooden combs from London cesspits, discovered traces of animal fats, lye, and even urine. Yes, urine, collected in clay jars, aged until it turned into ammonia, then mixed with herbs or oils to brighten hair. To us, it sounds revolting, but in the logic of the Middle Ages, this was science. Ammonia strips grease. It cleans, but it also burns, damages, and leaves behind a stench that clung to hair like smoke on cloth. And here lies the darker truth. Not everyone suffered equally. Hygiene in the Middle Ages was a battlefield between class, poverty, and power. Peasants washed their hair with whatever they could find: ashes, mud, moss, or the runoff from rivers polluted with waste. Meanwhile, nobles experimented with rosemary water, rose oil, or imported spices dissolved in wine. In royal courts, servants boiled herbs and flower petals, straining the water into perfumed basins so their masters could soak their hair in luxury. Class difference was written not just in clothing or food, but in the very smell of your scalp. But this story grows stranger when we peer into monasteries. As records show, monks shared communal combs, and sometimes even communal hair-washing rags. A 15th century Italian physician warned that this practice spread lice and disease, urging abbots to forbid it. Weeks later, he mysteriously died. His warnings vanished from later manuscripts. Once again, the evidence of danger was silenced. Why? Because hygiene was not simply about cleanliness, it was about obedience. Silence kept monasteries in control. And then, a chilling discovery. In cesspits beneath medieval cities, fragments of parchment had been uncovered, pages from manuscripts once considered heretical. Some were found stained with fatty residues and hair strands. Historians suggest that banned texts, whether Templar records, Cathar Gospels, or prophetic manuscripts, were sometimes torn up and used as hair-washing cloths. Imagine the humiliation. Sacred knowledge reduced to a rag for greasy hair. Was this accident or deliberate erasure? To wash away forbidden words, quite literally. Outside Europe, the story takes a different turn. In the Islamic world, hair care was tied to ritual cleanliness. Recipes included natural oils, henna, and perfumed rinses, methods that not only cleaned but nourished the hair. In China, rice, water, and herbal infusions were used, centuries ahead of European practices, while Christian Europe silenced conversations about the body. Other civilizations embraced cleanliness as both health and faith. So why was Europe different? because the church preached that vanity was a sin. To wash your hair too often, to perfume it, to shine it, was to tempt pride. Many clerics warned that focusing on the body distracted from the soul. Some monasteries even banned the frequent washing of hair entirely, declaring it an indulgence of the flesh. The result? Generations lived with lice, dandruff, infections, and sores, all while being told it was holy. But what if the story we've been told is incomplete? Mainstream historians laugh off these recipes as trivia. Peasants used ashes, nobles used oils. But why then do entire manuscripts on medieval hygiene disappear from archives? Why do Vatican documents mention only vague, unclean acts, but never describe what was forbidden? And why did a 1362 pastoral letter, uncovered by a whistleblower monk known only as Frater L., warn priests not to discuss the washing of the head, lest the faithful seek remedies of man instead of the mercy of God? Once again, silence was enforced. Think of what that means. To admit that urine, ashes, and animal fat damaged health would be to admit negligence. To admit that perfumes and oils could prevent lice or infections would be to admit that nobles had knowledge denied to peasants. To admit that hygiene mattered would be to admit that the plague, the Black Death itself, was worsened by filth, not divine wrath. Silence served power, and hair something as ordinary as hair was caught in the middle. So, what did medieval shampoo look like? A foul mixture of superstition, desperation, and inequality. Peasants rubbed mud into their hair. Nobles perfumed their heads with rosemary steeped in wine. Monks shared rags soaked in ashes. Scattered among them all are whispers of forbidden knowledge, silenced because it threatened the narrative of sin and punishment. Now, here is the revelation. If something as small as shampoo could be censored, what else has been erased? If manuscripts describing hair care vanished, what other knowledge about medicine, about science, about survival was buried in cesspits and burned in monastery fires? If history was rewritten in something as trivial as washing your hair, what about the history of plagues, of power, of truth itself? So the next time you open a bottle of shampoo, remember this: it is not just a convenience. It is the result of centuries of lost experiments, buried manuscripts, and silenced voices. It is the luxury our ancestors never had. And maybe, just maybe, it is a reminder that history is not always what we were told. If history was rewritten once even, and the dirt of Herod can be rewritten again. Subscribe, because truth, no matter how filthy or buried, always finds its voice.